Hi quilters, today I'm going to do a quick demo on my Over Easy Easter egg table runner pattern. I needed a new runner for my Easter table and I thought it would be a great time to show you how to make it. The pattern is available here at the Quilted Forest, and we also have kits that we put together that include the pattern and match the sample that you will see in the video. First off is the cutting, and you will want to cut some of your strips anywhere from 1.5 to 4.5 or 5 inches wide, and then the rest of them you're going to want to cut into 2.5-inch strips to make the half square triangle units from thangles. Now you can make the half square triangle units using any method you want, but I used thangles because that's my preferred method. So if you're going to use a different method to cut your half square triangle units, you would want to cut according to those plans. Once the strips are cut to the correct width, I like to cut the length down so I don't have a lot of extra fabric hanging off the end when I'm working with the thangles. So I will cut those pieces of fabric down to the same length as the thangles. Fabric strips should be right sides together, and you want to have the light piece on top next to the tangle. That way you will automatically press towards the darker fabric. You want to pin your tangle to your fabric and make sure that your pins are running parallel to the diagonal lines on the tangle unit. I mixed and matched my fabrics so that I would get a variety of different half square triangle units in different colors. Once your tangle units are all pinned, it's time to take them to the sewing machine, and you can chain stitch these through the sewing machine just like you do everything else. I'm using a size 90/14 needle in my sewing machine, and I have my 1/4-inch foot on, and I'm sewing on the dotted lines. That will be your 1/4-inch seam allowance, and then you will cut on the solid line. And I usually use the 90/14 size needle to get my perforation on the paper to be a little bit bigger so the paper is easier to tear off in a later step. So you just keep sending these through the machine, sewing on the dotted line, and then when you get done, take them off on the back side, cut them apart, and then just keep sending them through. And when you're done, all 6 of those dotted lines should have stitching on them. Once you have all the lines sewn on, it's time to cut the tangles apart. I put this on my cutting mat and just cut on the solid lines. It's easy to get a small ruler and just kind of swivel it back and forth to cut on the lines. When I get the lines cut through, I usually cut off the dog ear. On one side, the dog ear is already cut off, so I take the time right now to cut off the dog ears, and then I don't have to trim them up later. Once they're all cut apart, it's time to take them over to the ironing board and get them pressed. You're going to leave the paper on. You're going to put that on the ironing board, and then you're going to press away from the lighter fabric towards the darker fabric, which should be on top. I will confess I made a few mistakes and flipped my tangles upside down, but either way, it's going to work. Now that they're pressed, it's time to remove the paper. I usually put my thumbnail right on that seam on the smaller side of the tangle, and then I just do a quick flick up and it tears the paper and separates it from each other. I usually save this activity for when I'm sitting in front of the TV or if I'm riding in the car and I don't have anything else to do. This is an easy thing you can teach someone else to do too. I chose the 2-inch finished tangles to do this pattern, but you could actually use any size tangle that you want. I like the scale of the 2-inch finished, but if you wanted to have 2.5 or 3-inch or 1.5, you could use those sizes also. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 2-inch. Use whatever size you would like. Once all the papers are removed, it's time to take it over to the sewing machine, and you can start putting them together into different kinds of units that you want to use for your Over Easy Easter egg. As you can see by the picture, we use these half square triangle units to make different kinds of patterns for some of the rows on the Easter egg. This is done in a quilt as you go kind of fashion, so you can make these rows any size you want or any pattern you want. I just kind of played around with the half square triangle units until I found a pattern that I liked. I would just rearrange them until I found something that I thought would be kind of cute inside there. You can do any kind of pattern you want, and these aren't the only ones you can do. You can make up your own patterns to create something a little different. You can even combine the different colors in a row and make it a multicolor row. Once you figure out the patterns you want to make, you want to sew them together into a row. Again, they can be any width, but you want to get them anywhere between 18 and 24, 26 inches long. These are my completed rows. Some of them might not make the finished Easter egg, but I've got options to choose from. A couple different fun things. Make a template of the egg shape using the diagram provided in the pattern. You want to lay that template on the batting and then cut about 1.5 inches away from the edge all the way around. And once that's done, you're going to lay that on your backing fabric and cut a size the same as the batting. Cutting away the excess backing fabric will help you not fold that into the runner when you're sewing the quilt as you go lines. You want to baste the backing fabric to the batting, and you can use pins if you want, but because this is a quilt as you go option, a little easier just to use like a basting spray. I use the 505 basting spray. That is my favorite. Once it's all smoothed out, you want to flip it over to the front and make sure it is smooth on that side also. Using a ruler and a chalk liner, you're going to find the middle of it. I usually just fold it over on itself, kind of lay the ruler there, set it in place, and then use my chalk liner to draw a line from one side to the other. This will be your starting point for when you're doing the quilt as you go for putting the pieces onto the base. Before I start sewing, I like to kind of arrange it ahead of time so I kind of get an idea of how it's going to look. That way I can kind of cut down any of the pieces I need to, or if I don't have enough cut, I can make sure to cut more. And I can also decide which pieces go where to kind of even out the colors a little bit. I will overlap them a little bit because I know there's going to be seams in there, but I just want to make sure that the whole thing, I have enough fabric that the whole thing is going to get covered. And if I have to make any more additional half square triangle pieces, that I can do that now before I start sewing. All right, I've got the whole thing covered, so now it's time to start sewing. I'm going to line one piece right side up on that yellow line right next to it, and then I'm going to put another piece right side down, so those two pieces are facing each other, and I'm going to pin so that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I will pin. I'm also going to pin on the one for the other side because I want to go back and forth between the sewing table and pinning these pieces on, but I don't want to have to only do one seam at a time. So I'm going to work from the center out on both ends at the same time. Once it's pinned in place, you're going to take it to the sewing machine, and you want to put your walking foot on for this part because as you're doing these 1/4 inch seams, you're going to do them with your walking foot so you're quilting and seaming at the same time. As you're sewing this, you're going to be sewing through all 4 layers at once. You have your 2 pieces right sides together, your batting and your backing, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way across. I use a little bit of a back stitch at the beginning and the end of this seam and remove my pins as I'm going across. Once I'm done with this seam, I'm going to flip it over and do the other seam, and then I'm going to press. When I'm doing this part, I like to put my ironing board, my small pressing mat, right next to my sewing machine so I don't have to get up and down as often to go to the ironing board. So I will just sew and then press and sew and press. And I keep doing that until the whole top is done. As you keep adding strips to either side of this, you want to turn it over every once in a while just to make sure everything is still laying flat. Keep adding rows to your egg until the entire batting is covered. Once I've added all the rows, I will take it over to the big ironing board and give it one last pressing to make sure everything is laying nice and flat. Once it's pressed, you want to take it over and put it on a table so that you can put the template, the egg template, on top of it, and then you're going to pin it into place. And once you have it pinned into place, you're going to cut all the way around. Now you can either use your rotary cutter and cut, or you can just use a scissor and cut all the way around on that outer edge. Once you have cut all the way around, you could remove the pins, and then you'll see how fun your Easter egg runner is going to look. And now, since your quilting is done, all you need to do is bind it. Your binding strips can be cut from a single fat quarter of fabric. You want to start with a 45-degree angle cut going across the fat quarter, and then from that cut, you are going to cut your 2.5-inch strips or whatever width you like to cut for binding from that line that you've started with. You do need bias strips to cut this because of the curves of the Easter egg. These bias strips have a little give to them, a little stretch, and that will help you go around the curves and make your binding lay flat. You will sew your binding strips together just like you would sew regular binding strips together. Once your strips are sewn together, you're going to trim those seams down to 1/4 inch, and then you're going to press those seams open. Fold your binding in half, wrong sides together, and then you're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and your walking foot. You want to sew that all the way around the edge of your Easter egg. Be careful not to stretch the binding as you're sewing it on. You want to let it just lay nice and flat, and then just kind of ease it in and make sure you're pinning. You can either use pins or the clips as you go. And I kind of like to sew about 3 or 4 inches, stop, make my adjustments, make sure everything's still laying flat, and then I just keep going all the way around. Once your binding is attached to the front, when you get done and attach the ends together and you've got one continuous piece all the way around, you want to take it to the ironing board and press it flat to begin with. And then you're going to press it away from the quilt top. And then you're going to turn the whole quilt top over and press the binding around the edge to the back side. Once you have it pressed, you can either hand stitch it on the back, little whip stitch all the way around, or you can top stitch it from the front. I like to use an open toe foot and just go right in the ditch and catch the back through all the layers. I'm just going right in that ditch and sewing all the way around, and I just make sure I'm catching it on the back. I fold it over and just make sure it's going to be in that seam. Once I've gotten all the way around, I do a quick check to make sure I caught the binding at every point all the way around it, and you can just see it a little bit on that very edge. And it's done, ready for my Easter table. I'm just going to get a little basket, put some candy and eggs in it, and put it right in the center of my table. I hope that you will hit the like button, make a comment, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!